Good afternoon. This is Brian Lilly with AM 930 WEOL. My guest today is Tom Stuber, CEO of the Lakota Way, and we are here to do an interview as part of the First Response, a series of the ADAS Board of Lorain County, and we're going to discuss understanding addiction. Tom, thank you very much for joining us today on
Thank
such
you,
a
Brian.
hot and important topic in our county. If you could, briefly just share with me a little bit about addiction and what keeps a current drug addicted person using even though they know that it's bad for them.
Certainly, Brian. Um, if you've watched the news and you've read the newspapers, everybody's aware that this is a problem that's getting worse, that drugs are becoming stronger, more addicting, and more dangerous than anything we've ever had in our lifetime. What most people don't understand is that this is a neurologically based disease. It's not willpower, it's not good, evil, it's neurologically the individual has a different response to the chemicals than the other 90% of the population that doesn't have a problem. Let me give an example. Narcotics. If you're my age and you take a narcotic, it would probably just put you to sleep. And people would say, well, what's so addicting about that? But if you're in your teens, 20s, 30s, or even 40s, the reaction would be entirely different. When you ingested a drug, it would result in a excessive discharge of certain brain chemicals called neurotransmitters into the pleasure center of the brain that creates a level of euphoria much more intense than the euphoria created by cocaine, marijuana, or even sex. Because of that, you begin to see changes in the structure and function of the brain. The brain reduces the amount of this very necessary chemical, dopamine, serotonin, the same chemicals that are involved in depression and anxiety, and these are necessary chemicals to function normally. The structure and the function of the brain will change and ultimately result in intense cravings that become very controlling in the person's life. So controlling that it often supersedes normal basic instincts. We have women in the key in their 8th and 9th month of pregnancy who will sign themselves out against medical advice because the craving gets too bad. And certainly if you're talking about heroin, I don't know of a single person who's been addicted to heroin who hasn't had or known a peer who hasn't died of an overdose. And yet they continue to use. So it's overridden maternal instincts, survival instincts, and become a guiding force in their life. And that's what happens, is that the drug replaces that very necessary chemical in the brain and drives them to continue to use.
Yes, absolutely, and that is it is a shame that that course of action continues to take place. My follow-up question to you with that is overcoming the stigma, keeping people from giving up on someone such as that continues down that road of that path, I should say. How do we help overcome the individual stigma and the community-based stigma to help people in recovery?
The stigma is critically important that we do address it. So many people see this as a willpower issue or an intelligence issue or a good-bad issue, and in fact it's not. It's a brain disease that the individual is driven because of changes in the chemistry of the brain. But that stigma becomes one of the reasons why people are not accessing care when they so desperately need it. That we need to continue to educate individuals about the nature of this disease so that they can begin addressing it. I think part of what's going to need to happen is that we need to teach people what recovery is and what they need to do to be able to manage their illness. Addiction is a chronic condition as identified by the American Medical Association. It is no different than the other chronic conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and COPD. The only difference between one chronic condition and another is what organ it attacks. COPD attacks the lungs. Heart disease attacks, of course, the heart. Diabetes, the pancreas. And addiction, the brain. And to assist somebody into their recovery, what treatment is all about is helping the person learn how to manage their illness. If I'm a diabetic, I need to do three things to manage my illness. I've got to change my diet, I've got to take my medication, and I've got to exercise. And say I do that religiously for 3-4 months, and diabetes no longer becomes a driving force in my life. I'm stable, I'm feeling good, and then preconsciously or subconsciously my mind starts going with, you know, I can take my medication, that's no big deal. And exercise, I usually feel pretty good after exercising, and I've built it into my regimentation. But you know, I'd like to have that donut for breakfast again. And so the first time it's in front of me, I push it away because everybody said I should. Next time it's in front of me, I might have a little bit. And you know what? Not too much happens. Then the next week I have 1, 2, 3, and I'm back in the emergency room in a diabetic crisis. If we can provide people access to treatment, adequate treatment for the level of care they need, help them learn to manage their illness, and develop the supports necessary to continue to manage their illness, more people will experience the success of seeing people recover from this illness. And that is critically important to help get past the stigma. I also need to share that it was probably 4 or 5 years ago that I was down at the state, and I met with a senior officer in the Senate who said to me, I've been at home and talking with my county prosecutor, and we think the way to address this opiate epidemic is to slow down the ambulances. At that point, all I could say to him was, Senator, I hope this never touches your family. 4 years later, I met with him again, and his response was entirely different, that he was all in favor of getting the supports necessary. I think that what's happened, because this disease has no cultural, has no socioeconomic, has no political boundaries, that I believe that it probably touched his family.
Yes.
Most of us right now have a family member, have a friend, have a peer, have a coworker who's struggling with this epidemic. And I think as that happens, we're no longer seeing that it's the person under the bridge. We're seeing it touch home in terms of our own family and friends who have the same values we do, but they've got this disease.
Yes, and that leads up to my next two very important questions. The first being, what is the family's the family's place in helping with those in recovery, and with the numbers that they are currently suggesting that there's 10 to 15% of those suffering right now actually seeking recovery? How does that family's role play into making sure and helping more of those suffering find the road to recovery?
And let me answer both those questions separately, because I think I heard two questions.
You did.
The first is the role of the family. And quite honestly, when a family's dealing with somebody who has a very serious problem, they tend to enable. You know, we were raised to enable. Parents were supposed to enable their children. Spouses were supposed to enable their loved one or their spouse. And basically, if you go to Webster, enabling simply means to make someone able. Well, the problem is that when you're dealing with a chronic illness, if you're dealing with a disease that doesn't make sense, the efforts that I make to try to help, if they only create more harm or allow the individual to continue to act in a harmful way, then my enabling becomes dysfunctional. Families need to learn how not to enable. They need to learn how to set appropriate, caring, but appropriate boundaries. That if I'm doing things for my loved one who's 23 years old and I'm treating him at the same level as if he was 7 years old in terms of taking care of responsibilities and doing those things, then there's something wrong with my pattern of trying to protect. But families don't know what to do, and so they'll do anything. And in most cases, families that come to see me to do interventions have tried everything and nothing's worked. They have to learn several things. They have to learn to establish appropriate boundaries. They have to learn not to keep secrets. They need to use each other for support as they continue through this. And they need to be able to set expectations for what is good for their loved one and not accept anything marginal or less than that. An example, we have families who will deal with a loved one and they'll come to talk with me and they'll say, you know, I've got a loved one who is basically telling me that he's doing well in recovery and he thinks he should be able to cut back on his meetings. My response is, why do you think he's doing well right now? And they'll say, well, probably because he's going to meetings. Well, maybe that's something to be considered down the road, but maybe not now. Or they'll come to me and say, my loved one says if I just get him Suboxone, he doesn't need to do this treatment thing. Well, again, medication-assisted treatment without treatment isn't effective. And so we need to help them set those boundaries. A third rationale is, you know, my problem is heroin. And so I think I should be able to drink and smoke a little dope. All of those are train wrecks ready to happen. And they're rationalizations that will only permit the individual to compromise the management of their illness. And they shouldn't be accepted by the family. They should set clear boundaries related to that. And I forgot the other.
The other question was, how do we get more of those suffering into treatment?
Yeah. I think that you cited that about 10% of those that need treatment are accessing it in any 1 year. And that's true. And I think that one is that we need to address the stigma. It needs to be okay for people to seek care for their condition. Nobody's ashamed of going in and getting their arm set if they have a broken arm. They shouldn't be afraid of doing it. The second thing that is critically important is that we need to make sure that access to care is available when somebody wants it. Demand has always exceeded capacity in this county and actually in this state. When somebody seeks treatment and they're met with, well, we can see you for an appointment in 3 weeks, and then we can get you into treatment in another 4 weeks. That's unacceptable. Somebody with an addiction will reach out during a crisis, and they will solve that crisis. Usually, though, if they haven't solved it in a healthy way by accessing care, they'll solve it in a way that generally will result in more problems coming their way. Absolutely. Until they get into another problem. So we need appropriate access to treatment. We need adequate capacity of rehabilitation. We need the appropriate levels of care from residential, partial hospitalization, IOP, and low-intensity treatment. We need the appropriate medical treatment in terms of detox, ambulatory detox, and medication-assisted treatment. And we need treatment that will address multiple issues, such as medical and addiction or mental health and addiction. We need that continuum. And if I could put in a plug for issue 14.
I was just going to ask you, make sure that we talked about that.
This is going to be an opportunity for this county to again have a detox center, a men's residential center, and expand the amount of recovery housing available to individuals who need it. This county has not had a detox center since 1997 when Lakeland Institute closed. It has not had a men's residential program since 2007 when Compass House closed. We need those levels of care to make sure people are placed at the appropriate level of care. They will succeed if they're placed at the level of care that is pertinent to their condition and relevant in terms of what they need in order to develop a management. If we only have one level of care and we don't have the medical component, we don't have the other, we're going to continue to see people recycle through treatment. Stigma is going to stay there because people are going to say, see, it doesn't work, but it does work. The miracle does happen. People do recovery if they receive the right level of care.
Okay. And again, Mr. Stuber is talking about issue 14, which will be on the upcoming ballot in Lorain County. And I assume we want to vote yes for that. We are looking for support of issue 14 on the upcoming ballot. Well, Mr. Stuber, I want to thank you again for joining us on such an important topic. And to close, the last thing I'd like to ask you, someone that is looking to access recovery, could you please share with them where and how they would go about doing that very briefly here as we close?
They could contact the Licata Way at 440-989-4900. they could contact the Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services Board of Lorain County at 440-282-9920. Through the Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services Board, they would be able to access multiple levels of services, multiple providers.
All right, thank you very much for your time. And again, to close, anyone out there looking for information regarding recovery, or if you are someone looking to get into rehab services, again, feel free to visit LorainADAS.org, visit them on Facebook, or call them at 440-282-9920. There is help, there is hope. You have to take the first step. Thank you,